Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and today I'm going to be talking about a recent action taken by the New York State legislature that basically removes all restrictions to abortion at every single month of pregnancy and basically allows for abortion up to the time of birth. This is the most radical and wide-sweeping abortion legalization that we've ever seen, and it's coming from New York State. It's coming from the office of Mario Cuomo, also the governor of the state of New York. And I wanted to just read a little bit of a newspaper article I just read in the Sunday Post Journal, Jamestown, New York, Sunday Post Journal, January 27th, 2019. The article says, an unnecessary and inappropriate state lawmakers Young, Goodell oppose abortion legislation. So this is talking about the Republicans who oppose this very radical and way, what they're calling inappropriate and unnecessary bill that was signed by the governor. It says, now abortion legislation passed the state legislation last week and was immediately signed into law by Governor Cuomo that removed the requirement that abortions be performed by a physician, removed the requirement that an abortion be performed in a hospital, and eliminated all criminal protections for an unborn baby, and expanded the availability of abortions in the last few months of a pregnancy. So it did a lot of things, very radical things. The first one that I read was that it removed requirements that an abortion be performed in a hospital. So now abortions can be basically performed any place that calls itself an abortion clinic. It could be open up a storefront office, and they can be performed in there. But not only that, it can be performed by, it says the legislation also would allow non-surgical abortions to be performed by physician assistants. So you don't even have to have a doctor's assistance on this. It can be a physician assistant, nurse practitioners, and even midwives. So they can lead a woman through the abortion process in a non-surgical abortion, that is a chemical abortion. They can walk the woman through that whole process. It says the new legislation expands the availability of such an abortion right up until the day the baby is born if the mother's health is at risk. And we know that basically that is a phrase that means for any reason or for no reason at all. All you have to do is have a doctor sign off and say it's going to be some kind of a risk. It could be the emotional risk, it could be a mental risk, it could be a physical risk, it could be whatever kind of risk, financial risk maybe, who knows. But the definition of a woman's at risk could be wide enough to basically do anything. And so what the legislation is basically a woman can go in and have an abortion in New York State for any reason at all. Any reason at all. This is so extreme, and this is so barbaric, and this is so gross, and it's so immoral. A baby can be killed 1 second before it would have been born. A woman can go into an abortion office now, a strip mall at an office, and she can go in and have an abortion because the day before she was going to give birth, she decided she didn't want to deal with the complexity of raising a child. So everything's scheduled for her to have a live birth in a hospital. She decides a day before that live birth is to take place, she wants to have an abortion, and they will allow it now. And you don't even have to be a doctor to perform the abortion. You can simply be a non-doctor that works at the office. And so this is so outrageous. This is so gross. This is so extreme. And the reason it was done, I believe, is because there is the fear that because President is appointing supposedly pro-life judges, that has yet to be seen, but and we'll have to wait till the exact case comes up before the Supreme Court. But the left is so afraid that their precious right to kill babies is going to be overturned that New York State has preemptively passed laws that says, well, whatever the Supreme Court does, even if it passes a new decision that prohibits Roe v. Wade and disbands Roe v. Wade, dismantles Roe v. Wade, and puts it back to the states, we already have now, New York says, we already have a law that says it's totally okay for a woman to kill her baby up to the day or second before birth. And that's sad. That's really, really sad that they did that in New York State. Well, we're going to watch a video commentary by Christian commentator Matt Walsh, and he's going to talk a little bit more about this, and he's going to add a little more information than I did. So let's go ahead and watch him, and then afterwards I will go back and talk a little bit further on this subject at the end of the program. So let's go ahead and watch the Matt Walsh video right now.
All right, I want to talk about first, well, I don't want to talk about this, but it's necessary to talk about something utterly horrific. The state of New York, in an act of unspeakable, unconscionable barbarism, has made abortion legal through every stage of development up until birth, which means that now in the state of New York, you can kill your child, your fully formed, fully developed, pain-capable infant child, even a minute before delivery. Now, I remind you that, just to put this in context, in New York City, the abortion rate is so high, especially among minorities, that more black babies are aborted than born in the city. You're more likely, as a black baby in the womb, you're more likely to be killed than to be born. That is how, and the rate is very high among white babies as well, but it just shows you how common abortion is. And the state legislature, they're looking at that and they're saying, no, that's not enough. You know, the rate's not high enough. There aren't enough dead babies yet, so let's pass this law, and that's what they did. Now, here's a little bit more from the Daily Wire, and Amanda Prestigiacomo wrote a great detailed piece about this, which is up now. You can go read it. It says, the womb will become an even less safe place for unborn babies in New York come Tuesday. Democrat legislators are set to legalize abortion up to birth and remove the fatal procedure from the state's criminal code altogether with the passing of the euphemistically named Reproductive Health Act. The proposed legislation erases the current limitation on abortion in the state, which is set at 24 weeks. The Reproductive Health Act states, and this is important, okay, listen to this, every individual who becomes pregnant, every individual, by the way, so not every woman, but every individual in case a man gets pregnant, which of course does happen apparently these days. Every individual who becomes pregnant has the fundamental right to choose to carry the pregnancy to term, to give birth to the child, or to have an abortion. So long as a licensed practitioner acts in good faith, a baby can be murdered in the womb up to birth in order to, quote, protect the patient's life or health. Notably, the meaning of the word health is not defined within the legislation. Okay, so there are a few things to highlight here. You're going to hear liberals latching on to what I just read there about the, protect the woman's life or health. And some of the justifications I've already read on social media are saying that, well, really this is just it's just abortion is only legal in order to save the life of the mother. That's all. So it's just extreme cases. No, that's not true. Okay, that's simply false. This legislation legalizes abortion through every stage of development for the sake of the mother's health, for the sake of her life, but also her health. Health is a very broad term. It is an intentionally broad term, and it could mean anything. There's a reason why they didn't define it. They didn't get into any more specifics. So are we talking about physical health, emotional health, psychological health, financial health? Well, yeah, we're talking about all of the above. Anything at all. The vagueness of the term leaves it open to mean anything, and that's the point. So you combine the vagueness of this qualification with the fact that the law declares abortion to be a fundamental right for every pregnant individual. You combine those two things, and that clearly means that a woman can get an abortion at any time for any reason, period. That's what it is. The only stipulation is that they might have to kind of vaguely couch their reason in terms of health. That's all. And then they can get the abortion. Second thing to remember is that, and this is sort of irrelevant anyway, considering that this law has nothing to do with it, but the whole idea that you would need abortion to save the life of a mother is a total misnomer. Okay, you do not need abortion. That's a thing that doesn't exist. And I know people will say, well, what about ectopic pregnancies? I'm not talking about ectopic pregnancies. That's a totally separate issue that we could deal with. And, I would argue that treating an ectopic pregnancy is not the same thing as an abortion because of the principle of double effect, but that's a totally separate conversation. We're talking about, these are late-term abortions after 24 weeks. There's no such thing as a ectopic pregnancy in its third trimester. That doesn't exist. So late-term abortions to save the life of the mother, it doesn't exist. That's not a thing. It is a category that doesn't exist. It is never necessary, never, ever, under any circumstances necessary to get a late-term abortion to save the life of the mother. Never necessary, period. So anytime someone says that, they say, well, we need to have abortion through all stages in case the life of the mother. Just make sure to correct them and say, no, that's false. There has never been a scenario ever in history, ever, where a woman in the second or third trimester needed to get an abortion to save her life. Never. Why? Well, the reason is obvious. Okay, what kind of thing could make a later term abortion necessary? Just think about what might come up that would supposedly necessitate that. Well, there could be some kind of cataclysmic complication with the child. There could be a health problem with the mother. There are situations you hear about where the mother is diagnosed with some aggressive form of cancer while she's pregnant and she can't treat it while she's pregnant. So, I've heard that proposed as an example of something where an abortion is necessary to save the life of the mother. But whatever the case is, all it means is that the baby has to come out, okay? It means that the mother has to give birth. She has to get the baby out of her. And those sorts of cases do happen, where there is something cataclysmic that goes wrong, either with the mother or the child, and now the pregnancy could be fatal to both of them potentially. So the pregnancy has to end. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, as I said, all it means is that the child has to come out. The child has to be delivered much earlier than expected. Then the question is, why do you need to kill the child first? Why does the preemptive killing of the child contribute to the mother's health? If a mother is at 30 weeks and something cataclysmic has gone wrong, pregnancy has to end. Okay, that happens. It's a terrible thing, very difficult. So you take the baby out. That's all. You don't need to kill the baby first. You just take the baby out. Either way, the baby has to come out. In a late-term abortion, okay, the way that these things are conducted, and I hate to be graphic with you, but I think we all should face what these things are. And rather than using euphemisms, I think we should be frank and clear about it. So here's how a late-term abortion is done. The baby is injected while the child's still in the womb. He is injected with poison into his head or into his torso, and then he dies. And then the mother carries the dead baby around in her body for 2 or 3 days, and Sometimes she'll go back in the next day and they'll check and the baby's still alive and has been suffering all that time. And so they inject him again and then he dies. By the way, this is a horrifically painful death for the child, and a child in those later stages absolutely can feel pain. There's no question about it. They've got a developed nervous system. They can feel pain. And to be injected with poison into your skull, well, I don't think I need to explain how incredibly painful that would be. So the baby's injected with the poison. The mother carries the dead child around in her body, and then she delivers the dead child. There is a delivery that happens. Sometimes she delivers the child in the clinic, but then oftentimes she's not able to get to the labor comes on very quickly. She's not able to get to the clinic, so she ends up delivering in, say, the hotel bathroom into the toilet or something like that. So again, the question is, the mother has to go in, if the mother decides for whatever reason at that stage that she doesn't want the baby inside her anymore, she's going to have to deliver the child regardless. There is no medical reason ever why you would need to kill the baby first. You could have just as well delivered the healthy baby. That in-between step of injecting poison into his skull, obviously that doesn't contribute to the mother's health. And obviously it's just another step that's more dangerous for the mother and clearly the child as well. So the injection of poison into this process, that doesn't make it medically safer for anybody. So again, if she's 20, I feel like this needs to be emphasized because I keep hearing this and it makes no sense. If she's 26 weeks or 30 or 32 or whatever, she could deliver the child and the child could easily survive, easily. The preemptive murder of the child is not ever necessary for her health, ever. It is just murder. It is just death. It is killing. That's all. I'm sorry to be graphic with you, by the way, describing how this happens, but I think it's important to be frank about what we're dealing with, not to cover it in these kind of code words and everything that the pro-abortion left likes to use because they cannot confront the wickedness of this procedure that they support. And we should be clear that the state of New York just made it legal to give a fully developed infant a lethal injection. That's what happened. Which brings us to an interesting point, by the way, because let's look at this dichotomy here. It is unconstitutional in the state of New York to give the lethal injection to convicted criminals. They don't have the death penalty. They haven't had it for many years. And it's been ruled unconstitutional. So if a man rapes and murders a child, for instance, in the state of New York, you cannot give him lethal injection. It is unconstitutional. Which means that the lethal injection can only be administered to babies in New York. Think about that. The lethal injection is legal in New York, but only if you're giving it to a baby. I mean, here's the thing. This is why I always say that abortion is a litmus test issue. Not just a litmus test for politicians, although it is that. But it's a litmus test for human beings in general. It tells me kind of like everything I need to know about you as a human being. Because you are just not a decent person if you support giving lethal injection to infants. You are a sick and perverted person if you support that. And then I realize that I'm calling millions of Americans sick and perverted, but so be it. I wish we didn't have all these sick and perverted people out there, but we do. And I really mean it. I want you to know how deeply I mean it. That if you're watching this right now, you're listening, and you support this, and you think this is okay, and you're kind of offended now. You're saying, well, how dare you call me sick and perverted? Well, yeah, that's what I'm calling you, because you are. That's what you are. I wish you weren't that. I wish you were a better person than you are, but right now you're just not a good person. Because good people don't support giving lethal injection to babies. And I feel like I'm setting the bar pretty low here. That is not a high bar to get over. I mean, if you can't even clear that bar of not supporting the lethal injection for infants, then, I mean, there's nothing I can do for you. You're just not a good person. But there's still hope for you, and I pray for you, but you need to let go of this horrible, horrible ideology that you're clinging to.
Well, as you can see, that this is upsetting, and it should be upsetting. A lot of people are upset with this law. These two lawmakers in New York, Andy Goodell and Kathy Young, are upset about it, as well as a lot of other people that are not in New York City. One of the problems with the state of New York is that New York City basically controls the whole rest of the state of New York. If you live in upstate New York, if you live on the western side of New York, or the so-called southern tier, you basically get swamped and overwhelmed by New York City. New York City basically dictates everything in the state, and that's why the state is so far radically left, and that's why they could actually pass some kind of this outrageous abortion legislation, is because of New York City. And as Matt Walsh said in his commentary, there are more, in minority groups, there are more abortions performed in New York City than live births. So there are more women going in for an abortion than they're going in to have a baby. It's that bad in New York City. And so the whole rest of the state basically has to suffer whatever New York City wants because of that mega metropolis population center. Well, some of the other things that make this new legislation so terrible is that before, the actual baby in the womb had some rights. And Matt talked a little bit about this, but I'll mention it more. It says here in the article, reversing decades of law, the abortion legislation eliminated any criminal penalties for the wrongful killing of an unborn baby. Under the prior law, the unlawful killing of an unborn baby could result in a homicide charge. Not anymore. All the criminal protections for an unborn baby were repealed by this abortion legislation. So a woman can be carrying her baby to full term, and the day before she goes into the hospital to deliver a baby, someone comes up to her, beats her up, robs her, and as a result of that assault, her baby dies. Under the prior law, that criminal would not only be charged with assault and battery, but also homicide for the killing of that baby. That baby was alive, and now it's dead because of this criminal activity. Under this new law that New York just passed, in which the House and the Assembly in Albany were clapping their hands and they were cheering when this was finally signed in, cheering the death of babies. Now the baby has no rights. The baby has no status before the law. A criminal can kill a baby in the womb of the mother, and there is nothing the courts will do as far as that death is concerned. Now, they will still be able to charge the assailant with assault and battery on the woman, but as far as the baby is concerned, it is zero. It's nothing. It's worthless. This is a violation of human rights, people. And this is where the state of New York is and where our nation is heading. And this is why we need to pray even more, and we need to fight even more. We need to learn what is taking place. We need to learn the arguments for and against these kinds of things, and then we need to fight and make the argument against this kind of barbarism, this radical, this outrageous, atrocious, diabolical, satanic, devilish kind of legislation that is coming. And it is not just going to be New York. New York has always sort of been the leader in this kind of evil. If you remember your history before Roe v. Wade was actually decided by the Supreme Court in 1973. New York State already had one of, if not the most lenient legislation for abortion, permitting abortion. And that's why New York State has been one of the, if not the leading states where abortions occur. It just seems like the politicians in New York State, especially again the New York City politicians and those that cater to New York City, they just are hell-bent on making New York State the state of death, at the culture of death. We talk about the culture of death in our country, the abortion culture. We talk about the death and dying of the young, innocent children in the womb. Well, New York State seems to want to claim the right to be the #1 culture of death state. It seems to be, it wants to be fighting against the culture of life. And this legislation that was just enacted is just one more example of how New York State is on a road, a collision course with the judgment of God. There is nothing else that can be said. New York State is on a collision course with the wrath of God. And there is going to be a point when God Almighty says, this is enough. I will not put up with this foolishness, this evil, this satanic action done by people, and something is going to happen, and it's going to be a lot worse than 9/11. It's going to be a lot bigger and on a bigger magnitude than 9/11. Now, nobody wants that. We know that there is terrorism. We know that we want to oppose terrorism, but we also want to oppose evil done within our borders, evil done under the guise of law, and that's what's happening in New York State with this barbarous abortion legislation that permits abortion up until the moment of birth. This is terrible, and we need to pray for our state. We need to pray for our nation. We need to pray that the Supreme Court and the conservatives on there, the so-called conservatives, can muster enough votes to reverse Roe v. Wade and begin to reverse this awful condition that we have in our country. And as we just passed the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, we need to keep in mind and keep in prayer all of these issues. Well, I hope that's helped you, but we'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ and Culture. God bless.